You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 163. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Ashely Winstead, who is an academic turned novelist with a PhD in contemporary American literature. Ashely lives in Houston, Texas, and her debut novel is the psychological thriller In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife. Before we get to the interview, a quick word about Masterclass, offering online courses created for students of all skill levels with instructors that are the best in the world, including 18 courses on writing, including learning how to write best-selling thrillers, crime fiction, and mysteries from James Patterson, Dan Brown, David Baldacci, and Walter Mosley. Some of the other amazing and legendary instructors teaching courses about writing include David Mamet, Malcolm Gladwell, Margaret Atwood, R.L. Stine, Neil Gaiman, Salman Rushdie, and Shonda Rhimes, just to name a few of them. So go check out thrillingreads.com/on-writing to check out the masterclass courses focused on writing. And if you sign up via that link, you'll not only have great access to some amazing instructors, but you'll be supporting the podcast. So that's thrillingreads.com/on-writing. Okay, here is the latest interview with Ashely Winstead. Hey, everybody, this is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast today, I have Ashely Winstead, debut novel, psychological thriller, In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife. That is such a cool title. Welcome to the podcast, Ashely.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh, great. Thank you. And so, wow, a PhD in contemporary American literature. Did you always wanted to be a fiction writer when you began your studies? Has that always been in the back of your head?
Oh yeah, I actually describe it as like I've wanted to be a fiction writer my whole life, but I was kind of running from it as a young adult, and so part of like tiptoeing closer to writing fiction was getting my PhD and studying it. But I'm here now, which is good.
Yeah, that's smart. So you kind of like always, you're studying it, so you kind of were preparing for it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And so what was the deciding factor for you to finally sit down and write that novel?
Oh, I honestly had to find a way through my crippling self-doubt. This is just total honesty. I pretty much had to tell myself, so I finished my PhD, and of course part of that process is writing essentially a book length like project, your dissertation. And so I developed some great work habits of getting up early and grinding writing all day and just being really productive. So when I wrapped up my PhD, I thought to myself, you have just gone through a really hard thing. Getting your PhD isn't easy. And and you learned some good work habits. What if you actually applied, those work habits to writing the thing that you really in your heart of hearts want to write, which is a novel? And what if you didn't show anyone ever and you just did it for pleasure? So I had to really talk myself into starting.
That's funny too, because I can just imagine, because you have to like defend your work, and I mean that's like going to like a whole developmental edit kind of a thing. And
oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I will say it prepared me well for the for the world of like rejection and critique that you're subject to as a fiction writer as well, because yeah, that is some grueling critique.
Yeah, you really need a thick skin for this business, right?
Oh, 1000%.
And so, was just out of curiosity, that first book that you sat down to write, did you ever publish it? Is this one?
No, I didn't publish that one. It is currently shelved. Everyone needs their learning book or a few learning books or whatever it is. But I will say, to credit that book, I spent a few years learning how to write while writing it. I got into pitch wars with that book, and I got my agent with that book. So it did a lot of great things for me. It just has not seen the light of day, and maybe never will.
Yeah, well, that's great though. Yeah, like really, it got you on the right path. So that's cool. Versus just sitting away to never be seen.
Yes, I mean, I do feel a little bit like I catfished my agent though, because my first book was a contemporary YA fantasy. So I wrote that, and she signed me. She really liked that, gave me notes. And I was like, what if instead of doing all the revisions on this book I've been working on for years, I just wrote a psychological thriller and tried something new. So I went in this completely different direction, but luckily she was game for it. And I actually keep doing that to her, switching up genres. So.
Oh, yeah. See, so you write thrillers, and you like to write YA also. So you write different genres too. How's that switching back and forth between different genres? Is it challenging or?
I'm a Gemini, so apparently I have multiple people.
Same here. I'm a
multiple
Gemini as well.
living inside me, so it works out really well. I actually write romance as well.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. It's very satisfying, I find, to switch between genres, and I kind of drag a little bit of each other genre into whatever I'm writing.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about this book, about In My Dreams I Hold a Knife? Can you tell us a little bit about that? What's it about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, it's a psychological thriller, and I say also mixed with a drama and mixed with a romance, about 6 friends who go back to college for their 10-year college reunion. And the thing about these friends is that their senior year, one of the friend group is a girl named Heather Shelby, and she was found brutally murdered. And another one of their friend group was accused at the time, but never convicted of the crime. So this really terrible thing has happened, an unsolved murder their senior year. And now they're back 10 years later. They were really popular in college, and they've all done really amazing things. And they all have these different agendas for the reunion weekend. But none are really as ambitious as our main character, Jessica Millers, who is going back to college for this reunion, absolutely obsessed and determined to prove to everyone that she's become this really successful, amazing person. In a lot of ways, like the person that Heather Shelby, the girl who was killed, who's kind of the golden girl, that she's become that kind of girl, because people didn't really pay attention to her as much as her friends in college. So she has this real chip on her shoulder. She's there to prove herself. Unfortunately for her and for all of the other friends, someone else has a very different plan for the weekend and is going to use this opportunity when all the friends are back together in one place and in their old stomping grounds, no less, to peel back the layers of artifice, uncover all of their secrets, and find out who really killed Heather and why.
Wow, this is awesome. And that's coming up August 3rd, right?
Yep, August 3rd.
Okay, yeah. So by the time this podcast this airs, it'll be available, so people can go check that out. Just want to put that out there.
Yes, fantastic. Please do.
And so it seems psychological thrillers have been getting so much popularity in the last few years. I mean, I know it's been a genre that's been around for a long time, but it seems like so popular the last few years. Why do you think readers are liking that so much, and what drew you to that genre?
Ooh, such good questions. I'll start with what drew me to the genre, because maybe that's also why readers are gravitating toward it. So I am really fascinated by people who there's something kind of tragic to them, like they're trying so hard, and yet they aren't kind of getting this thing that they want, or there's their own worst enemies. I think in psychological thrillers, something you see a lot, which is really endlessly fascinating to me, at least, and I think maybe other readers, is that sometimes like the most chilling antagonist is yourself and your own brain. And I think you see that a lot in psychological thrillers with unreliable narrators, with complicit narrators, with main focalization characters that for a while seem like maybe they're like investigating a crime or looking for the truth about something, but that you slowly start to see the ways that they themselves are, guilty and complicit. So I love that. And I will also say something that just the reason I started writing this book was I really wanted to explore failure. And man, that failure to me is like something obviously that happens to everyone, something that happens to writers a lot and creative people, but it's something that is still so uncomfortable to talk about. I even feel like a little flutter in my stomach talking about it now. But at the time that I started writing In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife, I was like deep in a period where I'd experienced really significant professional failure. And I was in a dark place. I was thinking that, this dream of being a writer that I'd been working on for years, but really had wanted my whole life, was just actually never going to happen. And so instead of trying to like repress those feelings and push them down, which is what I probably normally do, I kind of allowed myself to lean into them and imagine a character who didn't repress her anxiety around failure, but instead like just refused to accept failure and would go to any lengths not to fail. And so that was kind of the seeds of my main character, Jessica. And so I think that something that's so attractive about psychological thrillers is that you get to go to dark places with the characters, places that you can't go to probably in real life, but you get to kind of experience it through them.
Also, what I also like about the psychological thrillers is it's like a normal person versus like a super cop or a spy or something. That's always kind of an interesting angle to them as well.
Yeah, I love that you're in the head of a normal person. This could be you. They are subject to all the same like foibles. Yeah, there's something very, very deeply relatable to that.
And were you a fan of the genre before you decided to try to write one of these?
I was, but I will say that I have taken it upon myself to school myself since I have started writing multiple psychological thrillers now. I've taken upon myself to do like a deep dive, especially into other psychological thrillers that are being published this year and the previous years. So while I would say yes, I was a fan, I've become much more literate in the genre, much more knowledgeable in the past year or so.
Did you find like your education, does it help you like read a novel like from a kind of like a business academic type way, or?
I can't stop it's like a thing I can't turn off, the academic like framing. And sometimes I feel like I am like the last person you actually want to invite to your book club, because everyone's gonna, be like talking about their experiences with the book. And I want to talk about like, ideological structures in the book and all the stuff that everyone's like, you know what? Okay. Like, we get it. You're a PhD, you studied books, like, go away. Let's actually talk about like the art part of this.
That's gonna be come in really handy though for like the actual craft and the writing part of it too. So that's kind of, never thought about that before.
Sometimes it does, but sometimes I've actually found that I can get in my own way by getting in my head too much about what I want a book I'm writing to mean, instead of just letting it be a story and kind of figuring it out. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Yeah,
but
it actually does. I mean, the second you said that, I'm like, I can see that. Yeah, like getting too much into the academic part of it, not just sitting back and just writing it.
Yep, exactly.
And so what is your writing process? I'm curious. Do you outline, or do you just kind of what is it, a seat of your pants? So what's your process like?
Oh no, I'm a meticulous outliner.
I figured
as you can tell, a theme here is overthinking, clearly. So to no one's surprise, I am a meticulous plotter, a meticulous outliner. I actually write a book out in its entirety, chapter by chapter, in my outline before I ever start actually like writing it as a book. So I do that for two reasons. One, because I really need a roadmap. I need to know where I'm going in order to feel like kind of free to be creative. And the other thing is that once again, I need to always trick myself into doing things. So I'm like, oh, you basically wrote a book already. It's just, in the form of a 40-page outline. All you need to do is just flesh it out a little bit longer. And so I trick myself into sitting down in front of the computer every day to just flesh it out, because it feels like I'm so close.
I like that. That's a good idea. Yeah. And so I was curious too. I've seen your book described as like a millennial thriller, and so I was kind of curious about that because I hadn't not familiar with that before. So is that in the millennial market? Are millennial readers enjoying crime fiction? Do you have to change the stories up a little bit now with the changes that we've been going through these last few years? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, I love that question. And I've been thinking a lot about it. The reason that we describe In My Dreams I Hold a Knife as a millennial thriller is because it takes place during like the 2005 to 2009, like at the or the sorry, it's a past and present dual timeline, and the past when the friends were in college is between 2005 and 2009. So that is, was at the height of the recession. So these six friends who are in college, who are at this really elite Southern university called Duquesne University. It's this really competitive atmosphere and environment, both socially, with Greek life, and also academically. So there's all of this competition that is just endemic and natural to their lives, and everyone is competing with each other for jobs and popularity and fellowships and so on. And then the recession hits as the kind of background to the story, and it really turns the screw tighter, and it dials up the tension and the stakes of all of these competitions they're in. And so this is obviously this is something that I experienced because I graduated from college in 2008.
Ooh,
Kind
timing.
of in the midst of the recession, and can recall feeling existential dread about like all the paths for the future I'd imagined kind of being wiped off the plate. Had a ton of friends who had jobs and then lost them before they graduated because everything was just topsy-turvy and a mess. And so, there's been a lot written about like millennials as a burnout generation because, people smarter than I, scholars who study these things, have made a lot about the habits that millennials learned, particularly those who graduated during this time of like complete economic uncertainty, learning about the fact that, you're always, nothing is ever certain or secure. You always have to fight for your place. You can never rest easy. And so a lot of those feelings really imbue the book and are part of the book. And so that's kind of why we're calling it a millennial thriller. One other thing I'll say though is that, I'm seeing a lot, obviously, just because this is the natural way of things, but a lot of thrillers being published with millennial characters, oftentimes written by millennial aged writers. And it's really interesting to me to notice thematic patterns across these thrillers. So I'm thinking of a book with a really similar premise to In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, but it was published earlier, called The Girls Are Also Nice Here by Lori Elizabeth Flynn. I'm thinking of The Divines by Ellie Eaton, which was published earlier this year. For the Best by Vanessa Lillie. And so all of these books are really interested in complicity, how their main characters are complicit in like institutional and ideological violence, which I think is really fascinating because ostensibly millennials are in a very aware generation. At least millennials have performed like awareness of social injustice really vocally, like on social media. And so it's really interesting to see writers a kind of generation, if you will, of writers kind of wrestling with what complicity looks like now. And so, like I said, don't invite me to your book club. that was a ramble. Sorry about that.
No, that's fascinating too, because I never thought about that too, because like, I'm a Gen X person, so, or from that generation. So if I was to write a book about a 30-year-old now, I'd be writing it from my head, but you really should be thinking about, like what the current generation is like. So it's kind of interesting. It's things I think writers need to keep in their head if they're going to tackle a novel.
Oh yeah, whenever I think about going back to write YA, I have to remind myself how far removed I am from teenagers, because yeah, I would approach it with my millennial brain of like what that experience was when I experienced it, but it's like, light years away now.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting too, because now I've been reading articles about Gen Z and millennials are starting to go at each other, kind of like the Gen X and the millennials. So it's like, it just keeps repeating itself, I guess.
It just keeps repeating. Yep, and it will,
Yeah,
for all time.
always has. That's kind of funny. So I was kind of curious too now about your research process. I always like to ask this about my guests. Do you do a lot of research before you start writing these books? And I'm assuming from your academic background what the answer is, but
yes, yeah, you can tell already that I love doing research, and part of it is just a deep fascination to know things, but the other half of it is just like deep sense of like I need things to be accurate. So I'm going to spend an hour, researching if this particular flower blooms in this particular region at this particular time of year, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do all of that. But for In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife, I actually would say that it is one of my least researched books, insofar as I've written other books where I just did such heavy research, like the thriller I have coming out after In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. I just did so much research for. In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, I relied a little bit more on my lived experience than I have in other books. I, of course, did a lot of research to make sure that I wasn't unique in my lived experience. And, some of the things that I would describe were going to resonate with other people. But one of the cool things that I did / eye-opening things was when I was in college, this thing, I'm sure listeners will be familiar with it, but it was a college message board called Juicy Campus. And I think Juicy Campus was the first sort of one of these college message boards. But a lot popped up after Juicy Campus was like banned from almost every college in this kind of wave once people figured out what was going on. But it was essentially a message board for each college that all lived on the Juicy Campus site. And it was, you posted anonymously about your peers and what was going on campus. And so it really created this, it contributed to a very toxic environment, as you can imagine. Like the things that people would say on these message boards about other people were truly awful at times. And Juicy Campus pops up a little bit in the book, not too much, but I actually used the Wayback Machine, which is this, internet archive that kind of archives past websites. It's very cool. It's a very cool research tool for novelists and like anyone interested. But I went back on old Juicy Campus message boards just to kind of get a feel for college students back in 2009. And it was just quite eye-opening to remember how dialed up the emotions of everything was, like everything felt so life or death, high stakes. And that really kind of came across in these message boards. So it was great in that it reassured me, like, yep, I am accurately describing the college experience that I remember. But also I was like, phew, I am so glad that I'm not there anymore.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. With all the stuff now on social media, it'd be hard to like just be a college student without, like everything could be right out there, and then millions of people might might get in your head.
Oh my gosh.
Kind of crazy.
My freshman year is when Facebook first launched. And I actually still like remember someone yelling at me across campus, like, "Oh, I'll look you up on Facebook," and thinking like, "What's that?"
Yeah.
Like going back to my desk, my old dinosaur desktop, and looking it up.
Something I wanted to ask you too, because you mentioned before about the dual timelines. Now, so how do you keep that? How do you keep that straight when you're when you're putting it together? I'm kind of curious about that process.
Yeah. So I, once again, just very, very meticulous, writing everything down, like this, writing everything that's going to happen in the past and the past chapter here, and creating these timelines. So I have a number of different plots that are kind of working together, plot lines, subplots, and kind of weaving together in the book. And I color coded each one so that I could see when I, at a quick glance in my spreadsheets and my outlines, that everything was like kind of consistently, I was visiting each of the subplots consistently. They were all weaving together in a pleasing way. But when I really wanted to tell a story in a dual timeline, because for my main character, Jessica, she's 32 in the present time of the book. But as she says really early on in an early chapter, for her, the past is still alive. It's like something she just can't let go of. The reason she can't let go of it is like, there are many reasons, and you'll find out through the book, some good, some bad, but the past is very much alive for her. And so I wanted to make it almost literal, a kind of literal experience of the past being alive for the reader. And so that's why I wanted to go back and forth. And I was also determined. So I love dual timeline books. My one gripe with some dual timeline books is that you'll learn something, whether it's in the past or the present, and then you'll jump to, the alternate past or present, and you'll kind of just like revisit that or talk about the implications. And I really wanted to create this experience where you're moving really quickly through the past and the present. And so almost in every chapter, you're kind of learning something new. And so there's no like real revisiting. It's like, even if you're going into the past, you're going to learn something new that sheds new light on the present, but the present isn't going to stop to wait around to talk about it. It's going to kind of move on. So that was only possible through all my spreadsheets.
So spreadsheets, and what do you use to actually write the stories? Is like Word?
Just Word. Okay. I am a simple creature.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy.
Uh-huh. And so I was kind of curious to know, with this crazy year with the pandemic and everything, what are you planning to do for future books? Are you going to address it? Are you going to ignore it? Alternative universe? What are your plans on?
Oh, 1000% ignoring the pandemic in future books. Like,
sweet.
Just not, that is just, I'm so curious to know what other folks are going to do, but I am just going to, act like it never happened.
Well, I've been asking this question now for the past year for like, I think probably now about, I don't know, 20, 30 times, and most everybody's ignoring it. So I think it's good. I think we're all sick of it. So
good. As long as we're all on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. That the memo's out. Yeah. And so what are you mentioned you're working on another book now. Can you, any tidbits or any sneak peeks you can give us on that one? What's it about, or when's it coming out?
Yeah, so I actually have 2 books coming out next year in 2022. One's a romance and one is a thriller. So I'll tell you about the thriller. It's coming out in August 2022, so like almost a year exactly after In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, and it is a cult revenge thriller.
Ooh.
It kind of loosely inspired by the Sarah Lawrence sex cult story. Not sure if a ton of people know about this story, but and the NXIVM cult.
Oh yeah, I know that one. I'm not familiar with
Yeah.
Sarah Lawrence, but yeah, the NXIVM's not on the news all the time.
Yes, the NXIVM cult, so well known. There's already a ton of documentaries and a ton of interesting things being written about it. But the Sarah Lawrence cult, it was like the outlet The Cut, I think, broke the story, or at least did like the major deep dive into it. But in a nutshell, a student's father moved into her suite with her and her suite mates at Sarah Lawrence, and eventually over years kind of indoctrinated his daughter's friends into essentially a cult. And it was very disturbing, the things that he taught them, the things that he had them do for him. He extorted a lot of money from their parents, and this went on for years and years. And it's so fascinating. I mean, it's terrible. It's also so fascinating to me that A, it was allowed to go on for so long, and B, that more people don't know about it because the story is wild. And so thinking about NXIVM and this kind of pseudo cult at Sarah Lawrence really got me thinking, how, from the perspective of the survivors of these cults, how do you come to be in a place where you're accepting someone else's authority and doing things that you probably previously would never have dreamed you'd ever do? And what does that process look like of submitting to someone else? And is there even any transgressive pleasure in it? I mean, there has to be some attraction. And so I was just really interested in telling a story from the perspective of someone who had been in a cult like this and was now on the outside and kind of running up against it again. So I am really excited about that book. And yeah.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I've always been obsessed with cults too for a long time, so I'm looking forward to that one.
Thank you. Yeah. I love reading about cults.
Yeah, and so I always like to ask my guests before, kind of like the final question before I let you go is, I have aspiring writers that listen to this podcast. Any advice for them?
Oh my goodness. Yes, so much. First, you are going to, no matter how good you are, how talented you are going to get knocked on your ass over and over again. Do not do what I did and let it stop you from writing or take you to dark places. I mean, let yourself feel what you're going to feel, but the difference between a successful writer and an unsuccessful writer isn't talent, it's just persistence. So just keep going.
Oh, I love that. That's great advice. Where can our listeners find you? What's your website?
Oh, yeah. It's ashleywinstead.com. And I'm on Twitter at Ashely Winstead.
Okay, great, Ashely. And so In My Dreams I Hold a Knife will be out August 3rd. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you so much, Alan. I had a blast.
Thank you for listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with one of your favorite writers of mysteries and thrillers. Or if this episode's guest is new to you, I hope you give their books a chance. Helping listeners discover new authors and books is one of the coolest outcomes of doing this podcast. As always, you can head over to thrillerauthors.com to sign up to my Thrilling Reads email list. That way you won't miss out on any great deals in thriller and mystery books. You can also check out all the links and resources in the show notes for this episode over at thrillerauthors.com. And also please do subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and leave a rating and review wherever it is that you're listening to this show. If you have done that already, I thank you. I really do appreciate your support. For my other links to my author website, social media haunts, and more, check out thrillingreads.com/links. All my links will be on that page. So that's it for this episode. See you next time, and stay safe out there.